A soldier foraged in fire, April 13, 1945. The air over the field south of Zwolle was thick with the scent of damp earth and cordite. For Private Leo Major, hunkered down with his unit, le Régiment de la Chaudière, the approaching dusk of April 13, 1945, brought a familiar tension. The Dutch city, a vital hub with a population of around 50,000, lay just across the Zwolle Canal, shrouded in a nervous silence. The plan from high command was straightforward, if brutal. An artillery barrage was scheduled for the following morning to soften up the German defenders before the main assault. To Major, a man already intimately familiar with the destructive power of artillery, this plan was anathema. He had seen what shells did to cities, to the homes of the innocent, to the very people they were there to liberate. He turned to his best friend, Corporal Wilfred Willie Arsenault, his voice low but intense. "Willie," he muttered in his native French, "an artillery barrage will kill civilians. And it will warn every German in that city. It's a stupid plan." This was not the brash talk of a green recruit. Leo Major was a hardened veteran, a soldier who had collected more than his share of scars. Born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to French-Canadian parents, he had moved to Montreal as an infant and enlisted in the Canadian Army in 1940. He was a scout and a sniper, roles that suited his independent, resourceful nature. His war had been a litany of near-death experiences. During the D-Day landings, he had been part of the first wave at Juno Beach, capturing a German Hanomag half-track single-handedly. Weeks later, during the Battle of the Scheldt, a brutal campaign to open the port of Antwerp, a phosphorus grenade had left him with partial vision in his left eye. A field medic had told him his war was over. A sniper needs two eyes, the doctor had reasoned. Major's response was characteristically defiant. "I only need one good eye to sight my rifle," he had retorted, refusing evacuation. He argued he was a more effective sniper with one eye than most men were with two. Later, his back was broken when his vehicle hit a landmine, but again, he refused to be sent home, escaping the hospital and rejoining his unit. For Leo Major, the war was a personal account to be settled, and leaving before the job was done was unthinkable. Hello, listener, let me know where you're watching from. And if you don't mind subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, I'd be very pleased as the author. Enjoy listening. A Reckless Proposition, Evening, April 13, 1945. The silence from the city was unnerving. Canadian intelligence was thin. They knew Germans were in Zwolle, but their numbers, disposition, and morale were a mystery. Were they a token force ready to flee, or a determined garrison of SS fanatics preparing for a street-by-street bloodbath? Sending an entire regiment across the canal blindly was a recipe for a massacre. The commanding officer of the Chauds, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas S. Tiffy Glasgow, wrestled with this conundrum. He needed eyes in the city. He needed reconnaissance. When Leo Major and Willie Arsenault volunteered for a patrol, it was precisely what Glasgow needed, but their proposal was far beyond a simple scouting mission. They didn't just want to peek across the canal, they wanted to enter the city, make contact with the Dutch resistance, and assess the German strength from the inside. It was an incredibly risky, almost suicidal proposal. Two men, alone, entering a city held by an unknown number of enemy soldiers. Yet, Glasgow saw something in Major's one good eye, a fierce determination that bordered on clairvoyance. Major was known throughout the regiment as a brouillard, a fog, a man who could disappear and reappear at will. He was also notoriously insubordinate, but his results were undeniable. Glasgow, a pragmatic commander, recognized that sometimes the best solutions came from the most unconventional soldiers. He gave his assent but laid out the parameters. This was strictly a reconnaissance mission. They were to identify enemy positions, gauge their strength, and if possible, link up with the resistance. Above all, they were to avoid direct engagement and return before dawn to report their findings. They were not to start a fight. It was a condition Leo Major had no intention of honoring. Armed with submachine guns, a sack of grenades, and their own audacious courage, the two friends prepared to slip into the darkness, toward a city holding its breath. Into the shadow of Zwolle, 21:30 hours, April 13, 1945. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Major and Arsenault paddled a small canvas boat across the cold, dark waters of the Zwolle Canal. The city of Zwolle rose before them, a silhouette of spires and rooftops against a starless sky. There were no lights, no sounds of life. It felt like a ghost town. They landed silently near a railway track on the city's outskirts and crept forward, melting into the deep shadows of buildings and hedgerows. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded like a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. They moved with the practiced stealth of hunters, their senses on a knife's edge, scanning every window and doorway for a sign of the enemy. They had been given a password to identify themselves to the Dutch resistance, but first, they had to find them. Their initial objective was to get a feel for the German presence along the railway line that cut into the city's core. They hadn't moved more than a few hundred meters when the silence was shattered. A German sentry, previously unseen, challenged them. A burst of gunfire erupted from the darkness, the unmistakable rip of a German MP-40. Willie Arsenault, Major's closest friend, the man he had shared rations and jokes with since basic training, crumpled to the ground without a sound. A wave of ice and fire washed over Major. Grief, rage, and a cold, lethal fury coalesced into a singular purpose. The mission, the orders from Colonel Glasgow to avoid engagement, evaporated in an instant. This was no longer about reconnaissance. This was about vengeance. The Germans had just killed his best friend, and Leo Major was going to make the entire garrison of Zwolle pay for it. He lunged forward, his own submachine gun spitting fire. He killed the 2 sentries who had shot his friend, but it brought him no solace. Kneeling over Willie's body, he made a silent vow. He would not just complete the mission, he would complete it his way. He would take the city himself. He gently removed Arsenault's weapon and ammunition, slinging the extra submachine gun over his shoulder. He now had double the firepower, and his heart was filled with a grief so profound it had become a weapon. The one-man uprising begins, 2300 hours, April 13, 1945. Fueled by a potent cocktail of adrenaline and sorrow, Major began his personal war on the German occupation of Zwolle. He stalked the darkened streets like a phantom, a one-man whirlwind of controlled chaos. His plan was audacious and brilliant in its simplicity. He would convince the German garrison that they were under a full-scale assault by the entire Canadian army. He ran through the deserted streets, firing his submachine gun in short bursts, then sprinting to another location and throwing a grenade. The staccato bark of the Sten gun, the percussive thump of the grenades, and the shattering of glass echoed through the narrow alleys. He created the illusion of a large attacking force by making noise, constant, terrifying noise, from multiple directions. He would fire a few rounds, dash through a backyard, toss a grenade down another street, and then unleash another burst from a different alleyway. The acoustics of the city became his ally, amplifying and distorting the sounds, making his lone assault sound like a coordinated company-sized attack. He stumbled upon a German staff car. Without hesitation, he sprayed it with bullets, killing the driver and forcing the officer inside to flee. This act was more than just random violence, it was tactical. He knew that disrupting the command structure, however small, would sow confusion. Soon after, he located the main Gestapo headquarters in the city center. He stormed the building, his single eye scanning the rooms with deadly efficiency. In a brief but ferocious firefight, he killed several SS officers. This was not just about noise anymore, it was about decapitating the snake. The SS and Gestapo were the backbone of the German will to resist. By hitting them directly, he was attacking not just their bodies, but their morale. His actions were creating a feedback loop of terror. The German soldiers, already on edge, were hearing explosions and gunfire from all sides. Reports would be flooding their command posts, attacks on patrols, on staff cars, on the very headquarters of their most feared units. The lone Canadian scout was no longer just a man, he was becoming a terrifying, omnipresent force, the vanguard of an army that existed only in his actions and the Germans' frightened imaginations. A city of ghosts and gunfire, 1 o'clock hours, April 14, 1945. By 1 a.m., Zwolle was a symphony of chaos conducted by a single musician. Leo Major was a blur of motion, a specter armed with grenades and righteous fury. His strategy of deception was working better than he could have imagined. German soldiers, isolated in their guard posts and billets, were hearing the cacophony and seeing flashes of light all around them. Their communications were likely in disarray. Frightened sentries were probably firing at shadows, adding to the noise and confusion, effectively becoming unwitting accomplices in Major's ruse. He continued his relentless campaign, systematically targeting key infrastructure and symbols of German authority. He set fire to a building he identified as a German administrative office, the flames lighting up the night sky and serving as a giant beacon of defiance, further terrifying the occupying force. The fire added a new psychological dimension to his assault. The city itself seemed to be rising up against them. During his rampage, he encountered small groups of German soldiers. He didn't hide. He engaged them head-on, appearing from the darkness like an avenging spirit. In one encounter, he surprised a patrol, killing several and capturing the rest. But he didn't have time to take prisoners in the traditional sense. In a move of psychological brilliance, he disarmed them and then marched them towards the Canadian lines outside the city, essentially releasing them into Allied hands. He told them, in no uncertain terms, that the Canadian army was taking the city and that they should tell their comrades to flee if they wanted to live. He then turned around and ran back into Zwolle to continue his one-man assault. This masterstroke served a dual purpose. It removed enemy combatants from the city while also spreading panic. These terrified, disarmed soldiers would return to their units with wild tales of a massive, overwhelming Canadian attack that had suddenly materialized inside the city walls. The legend of the Phantom Army was now being spread not just by the noise of battle, but by the very mouths of the German soldiers themselves. The Architect of Fear, 2:00 hours, April 14, 1945. The city of Zwolle was now a labyrinth of fear, and Leo Major was its architect. He had successfully transformed the urban landscape into a weapon. Every narrow street amplified the sound of his submachine gun, every tall building bounced the echoes of his grenades, creating a phantom army that grew with each passing moment. By 2 a.m., Major's initial rampage had evolved into a more systematic, psychological operation. He understood that to break the garrison, he needed to do more than just make noise. He needed to sever its nervous system. His focus shifted from random acts of violence to a deliberate targeting of the German command and control infrastructure. From his earlier reconnaissance and the layout of the city, he had a good sense of where the key buildings would be located. He sought out telephone exchange centers and communication lines, severing cables with his combat knife or a well-aimed burst of fire. Each cut line plunged another German unit into isolation, leaving them blind and deaf, with nothing but the terrifying sounds of Major's attack and their own growing panic for company. This was a critical phase of his plan. A coordinated defense requires communication. Without it, a commander cannot receive reports, issue orders, or move reserves. Isolated units, fearing they have been cut off and abandoned, are far more likely to break and flee. Major, drawing on his scout's intuition, was instinctively practicing a form of modern network-centric warfare, but his network was one of fear, and he was methodically dismantling the enemies. His one good eye missed nothing. He spotted a military truck being loaded with supplies, a clear sign of a unit preparing to either relocate or retreat. He opened fire, not necessarily to destroy the truck, but to sow more chaos, forcing the soldiers to abandon their task and scatter. The seeds of panic he had planted with the captured patrols were now beginning to bear fruit, watered by the constant, disorienting violence. The German command structure in Zwolle, if it hadn't been decapitated already by his earlier assault on the Gestapo headquarters, was now being methodically strangled. The Unlikely Alliance, 3:00 hours, April 14, 1945. As he moved through the city's core, a flicker of light from a window caught Major's eye. It was a risk, but his mission's secondary objective, contacting the Dutch resistance, flashed in his mind. He approached the house cautiously, his weapon ready. Peering inside, he saw a family huddled together. He gave a low knock and whispered the prearranged password. The door opened a crack, revealing the face of a nervous but resolute man. This was his first contact with the people he was trying to save. and hurried, broken communication, a mix of English, French, and gestures, Major explained the situation. He was the vanguard of the Canadian Army, which was poised to attack at dawn. He needed to know the locations of the main German concentrations. The man, a member of the local resistance, quickly understood. He led Major to a tavern that served as a clandestine meeting point for the underground. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The resistance members had been awakened by the gunfire and explosions, assuming the final battle for their liberation had begun. They were astonished to discover the army was a single, smoke-grimed Canadian soldier with a fanatical look in his eye. Their initial disbelief quickly turned to fervent support. Here was the chance they had been waiting for. They provided Major with invaluable intelligence, confirming that the main German strength was concentrated in a few key barracks and defensive positions, but that morale was collapsing. More importantly, they knew the city intimately. They could guide him, point out hidden routes, and identify critical targets. A plan was hatched. While Major continued his noisy assault to keep the Germans' heads down, the resistance fighters would spread the word: the Canadians were here. They would prepare to welcome the liberators and, if necessary, deal with any remaining German collaborators. The lone soldier now had an army of auxiliaries, a network of eyes and ears that transformed him from a lone wolf into the leader of a burgeoning urban uprising. The Great German Exodus, 4 o'clock hours, April 14, 1945. The tipping point came around 4 a.m. The cumulative effect of Major's relentless assault, the constant noise, the targeted killings of officers, the severed communications, the panicked reports from captured soldiers, and the rumors now being fanned by the resistance, created a perfect storm of terror. For the average German soldier, crouched in a dark building and cut off from his superiors, the situation seemed hopeless. They imagined themselves surrounded by thousands of vengeful Canadians who had somehow infiltrated the entire city. The instinct for self-preservation took over. What began as a trickle of deserters soon became a flood. From his vantage points, Major watched in grim satisfaction as German soldiers, having abandoned their heavy equipment, began fleeing Zwolle on foot and bicycle, heading east towards Germany. Major didn't let up. He saw this as the critical moment to press his advantage. He directed his fire towards the main roads and bridges leading out of the city, not to block the retreat, but to hasten it. A burst of machine gun fire over their heads encouraged the fleeing soldiers to run faster, to not second-guess their decision. He was shepherding them out of the city with fear. It was a masterful display of psychological control. He had broken their will to fight not through overwhelming force, but through overwhelming terror. He had made the idea of staying in Zwolle infinitely more frightening than the prospect of abandoning their posts and facing the consequences later. By the time the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the vast majority of the German garrison, numbering in the hundreds, perhaps even over 1,000 soldiers, had evaporated into the countryside. The city was falling, not to an army, but to the myth of an army. Dawn of a liberated city, 5 o'clock hours, April 14, 1945. As dawn broke over Zwolle, an eerie quiet descended. The symphony of chaos had ended. The air, once filled with the crack of gunfire and the crump of grenades, was now still, punctuated only by the distant crackle of a burning building. Leo Major, physically and emotionally drained, caked in grime and gunpowder, found himself standing alone in the center of the city. He had been fighting, running, and terrorizing the enemy for over 8 hours straight. He had single-handedly routed an entire German garrison. The city was his. But the fight wasn't quite over. He knew there could be stragglers, die-hard fanatics who had chosen to hide rather than flee. He spent the next few hours systematically clearing the city center, his movements now more deliberate, ensuring it was secure. It was during this final sweep that the true fruit of his labor became apparent. As the sun rose higher, the citizens of Zwolle began to emerge from their cellars and homes. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, they stepped out into the streets. They saw the evidence of a great battle, shattered windows, smoldering fires, abandoned German equipment, but no Canadians. Then they saw him, the lone soldier, walking their streets as if he owned them. The resistance fighters explained what had happened, and the story, almost too incredible to believe, spread like wildfire. A wave of jubilation swept through the city. People began cheering, weeping, and embracing this solitary figure. They brought him food and drink. The Dutch flag, hidden for 5 long years, began to appear in windows. Leo Major, the grieving friend, the insubordinate private, the one-man army, was now Leo Major, the liberator. He had not just captured a city, he had given it back to its people. The return of the hero, 9 o'clock hours, April 14, 1945. Around 9 a.m., exhausted but triumphant, Leo Major made his way back towards the Canadian lines. He was carrying the body of his friend, Willie Arsenault. He had fulfilled his vow. The city was free, and Willie would not be left behind on enemy soil. As he approached the positions of le Régiment de la Chaudière, he was met with stunned disbelief. His comrades, expecting at best a whispered reconnaissance report, saw him walking out of a city they believed to be heavily defended, carrying his fallen friend. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Glasgow, came to meet him. Major was tired, grim-faced, and covered in the filth of battle. He rendered a simple report. "The city is clear," he stated. "But I have a friend who has been killed." Glasgow, looking past Major towards the silent city, was speechless. The planned artillery barrage, which would have commenced just an hour or two earlier, had been called off at the last minute due to Major's failure to return, a stroke of luck that saved countless buildings from destruction. Now, the reason for his delay was shockingly clear. Scouts sent into the city confirmed Major's report: the Germans were gone. The Dutch were celebrating in the streets. The Chauds marched into Zwolle not as conquerors fighting block by block, but as liberators, greeted by cheering crowds waving homemade flags. They had captured a major city without suffering a single casualty in the assault, and without a single civilian being killed by preparatory fire. It was an unprecedented victory, achieved not by a regiment, but by the sheer, audacious, and vengeful will of one extraordinary soldier. Tactical dissection of a one-man blitzkrieg analysis. To comprehend the sheer improbability of Leo Major's feat, one must dissect it from a military tactical perspective. His actions on the night of April 13th to 14th were, in essence, a masterclass in psychological warfare and asymmetrical combat, executed instinctively by a soldier on the ground. Major's strategy rested on 3 core pillars: deception, disruption, and demoralization. The deception was audacious, creating the acoustic signature of a far larger force. In the pre-dawn darkness of a tense, occupied city, the human mind is susceptible to fear and assumption. A single, mobile source of loud, varied noise, submachine gun, grenades, enemy weapons, can be misinterpreted by multiple, static listening posts as a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. He effectively hacked the enemy's sensory input. His choice of weaponry was crucial. The British Sten and German MP-40 submachine guns he carried had distinct firing sounds. By alternating between them, he could create the illusion of a firefight between attacking Canadians and defending Germans, amplifying the sense of a chaotic, escalating battle deep within the city's perimeter. The disruption was surgical. By targeting the Gestapo headquarters, a staff car, and communication lines, he wasn't just causing random damage, he was applying the principles of Schwerpunkt, focal point, to the enemy's command structure. He understood, perhaps intuitively, that a modern military unit is a network. Cripple the nodes, the officers and the communication links, and the network collapses. This is a doctrine that military theorists spend years studying, yet Major executed it on the fly, fueled by grief. Finally, the demoralization was total. By capturing and releasing German patrols with tales of a massive invasion, he weaponized information, turning enemy soldiers into unwitting agents of his own propaganda. This act, combined with the relentless, omnipresent threat, shattered the garrison's collective will to fight. They were not defeated by superior firepower, but by the crippling belief that they were already defeated. Leo Major had won the battle in their minds before the Canadian Army had even crossed the canal. The technology of a lone warrior, equipment analysis. The tools Leo Major used were unremarkable for a soldier of his time, which makes his accomplishment all the more astounding. His primary weapon was likely the Sten Mk2 submachine gun, a famously cheap and simple weapon issued widely to Commonwealth forces. Made of stamped metal parts and costing less than $10 to produce, it was often criticized for its crude appearance and occasional unreliability. However, it was light, compact, and fired the common 9mm parabellum round from a 32-round magazine at a rate of 550 rounds per minute. Its simplicity was its strength in this scenario. It was a tool for making a great deal of noise quickly. By carrying his own Sten and Willie arsenals, he had doubled his immediate firepower. His second key piece of equipment was the No. 36 Mills bomb, the standard British and Commonwealth hand grenade. A 2.5-pound cast-iron fragmentation grenade, its serrated body was designed to break into predictable shrapnel patterns upon detonation. Its psychological impact was immense. The loud, percussive crump of a Mills bomb is unmistakable and carries a significant shock wave, suggesting a level of explosive force far beyond a rifle or submachine gun. A sack full of these allowed Major to simulate mortar fire or satchel charges, adding to the illusion of a heavy weapons assault. This rudimentary loadout, 2 submachine guns and a bag of grenades, was all he had. He possessed no radio to call for support, no specialized night vision equipment, which was nascent and not issued to regular troops, and no body armor beyond his standard wool battle dress. His most advanced technology was his own honed senses, his physical endurance, and his profound understanding of fear. The contrast is stark. The Wehrmacht, a military force that had pioneered combined arms blitzkrieg with tanks, dive bombers, and sophisticated radio coordination, was routed from a city by one man armed with the most basic infantry tools. It underscores a timeless military truth: the human element, courage, ingenuity, and sheer force of will can, in the right circumstances, trump technological superiority. A hero's reward and a restless spirit, post-Zwolle. For his single-handed liberation of Zwolle, Leo Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, DCM, the Commonwealth's second-highest award for gallantry in action by non-commissioned personnel, surpassed only by the Victoria Cross. The official citation lauded his rare courage and devotion to duty and explicitly stated that his actions saved the lives of many of his comrades and averted a resistance which might have been both long and costly. The citizens of Zwolle made him an honorary citizen, a title he cherished for the rest of his life. Streets would be named after him, and his story would become a local legend, passed down through generations. However, the man himself was not one to rest on his laurels. His war was not yet over. Just a few weeks after the events in Zwolle, during fighting in the southern Netherlands, Major was again in the thick of it. He was assisting a regimental chaplain in loading corpses onto a carrier when a nearby tank was struck by enemy fire and exploded. The blast threw Major through the air, breaking both of his ankles and re-injuring his already damaged back. This, finally, should have been the end of his war. He was again sent to a field hospital with injuries that would have invalidated out any normal soldier. But Leo Major was anything but normal. The war in Europe ended while he was recuperating, but the restless warrior spirit still burned within him. He heard that Canada was recruiting a volunteer force for the planned invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall. Despite his injuries, the partially blind eye, the broken back, the shattered ankles, he managed to talk his way into volunteering for the Pacific Force. The dropping of the atomic bombs and Japan's subsequent surrender in August 1945 meant this force was never deployed. Only then did Leo Major's Second World War truly come to an end. He returned to Montreal, a decorated hero, but like so many veterans, he was a man irrevocably changed by the crucible of combat. The archival record, corroborating a legend. From the perspective of the war archivist, a story as fantastic as Leo Major's demands rigorous verification. The account is not merely folklore, it is substantiated by multiple, credible sources. The primary document is the official citation for his Distinguished Conduct Medal, published in the London Gazette on July 24, 1945. This military record, approved by the highest levels of the British and Canadian commands, provides the core narrative. It confirms his volunteer reconnaissance mission with Private Arsenault's death, and Major's subsequent decision to continue alone. It details his use of grenades and machine gun fire to trick the enemy, his capture of German patrols, and his assault on the Gestapo headquarters. The Regimental War Diary of Le Régiment de la Chaudière for April 1945 also corroborates the events. It records the patrol, the liberation of Zwolle without a fight on the morning of the 14th, and the astonishment of the commanding officer. Furthermore, the civic records of the city of Zwolle itself provide powerful testimony. The decision to make Major an honorary citizen, the naming of Leo Major Street, Leo Majorland, and the annual commemorations on the anniversary of the liberation all point to a deeply held and officially recognized historical event. Finally, there are the numerous post-war interviews with Major himself and his comrades. While a soldier's personal account can sometimes be colored by time, the core elements of Major's story remained remarkably consistent throughout his life. When all these sources, official military records, regimental diaries, foreign municipal archives, and personal testimonies, are cross-referenced, a clear and undeniable picture emerges. The legend is rooted firmly in fact. The one-man liberation of Zwolle actually happened. The Korean War, the Lion Roars Again, 1951. Leo Major's return to civilian life was short-lived. The quiet routine of his post-war job as a pipefitter in Montreal could not quell the warrior's spirit. When the Korean War broke out and Canada joined the UN coalition, Major, now 30 years old, re-enlisted. He was assigned to the Scout and Sniper Platoon of the 2nd Battalion, Royal 22E Regiment, the Vendeuse. In November 1951, Major would once again etch his name into the annals of military history during the First Battle of Mariangsan, a struggle for a critical piece of high ground known as Hill 355. For 2 days, a dug-in Chinese force of 2 divisions had held off a massive assault by the entire 3rd U.S. Infantry Division. On the 3rd day, Major and his elite team of approximately 18 scouts and snipers were tasked with retaking the hill. Under the cover of darkness and a mortar barrage, Major led his men up the steep slopes. They moved silently, infiltrating the Chinese trenches. Once in position, they opened fire with a devastating fury that again created the illusion of a much larger attacking force. The Chinese, caught completely by surprise from within their own defenses, panicked. Major directed his men with hand signals, coordinating their fire to sweep through the trench system. The fighting was at close quarters, brutal and personal. By midnight, against all odds, Major and his small team had driven the defenders, elements of 2 Chinese divisions, numbering in the thousands, off the hill. For 3 more days, Major and his men held Hill 355 against repeated, fanatical counterattacks from overwhelming numbers of Chinese soldiers. At times they were so close, Major was calling down mortar fire on his own position. For this extraordinary feat of leadership and bravery, Leo Major was awarded a 2nd Distinguished Conduct Medal, making him one of only 3 Canadian soldiers, and the only one in 2 different wars, to ever receive the DCM twice. The one-man army of Zwolle had proven, once again, that he was one of the most formidable infantry soldiers of his generation. The man behind the medal's biographical and psychological element. Who was the man capable of such monumental feats of arms? An analysis of Leo Major's biography and temperament reveals a complex character perfectly, and perhaps dangerously, suited for war. He was fiercely independent, inherently distrustful of authority, and possessed a stubborn self-reliance that often manifested as insubordination. In a peacetime army, he would have been a discipline problem. In a wartime army, he was a priceless, if unpredictable, asset. His refusal to be medically evaluated on 3 separate, career-ending occasions, loss of an eye, broken back, broken ankles, speaks to a willpower that bordered on the superhuman. This wasn't merely patriotism, it was a deeply personal pride and an unwillingness to let others dictate his fate. His superiors, like Lieutenant Colonel Glasgow, were wise enough to recognize that a soldier like Major operated best with mission-style orders, tell him what to do, but not how to do it. Psychologically, Major possessed an incredibly high tolerance for risk and an ability to compartmentalize fear, grief, and stress in the heat of battle. The death of his friend Willie Arsenault did not paralyze him with shock. It acted as a catalyst, focusing his rage into a cold, efficient instrument of war. This ability to transmute profound emotional trauma into tactical brilliance is exceptionally rare. He demonstrated a form of battlefield intelligence that is not taught in manuals, an intuitive grasp of enemy psychology, the terrain, and the exploitation of chaos. Yet, this warrior spirit came at a cost. In later life, he lived with the physical and mental scars of his service. He was a humble man who rarely spoke of his exploits unless asked, but he attended reunions and returned to Zwolle multiple times, where he was greeted as a living legend. He was, in essence, a modern-day berserker, a man who found his truest, most terrifyingly effective self in the crucible of combat. He wasn't a soldier who simply fought in wars, he was a warrior who needed them. The home front and economic context, a wider view. While Leo Major was enacting his solitary drama in Zwolle, the larger economic and home front realities of the war framed his actions. By April 1945, the Allied war machine was operating at its absolute peak, while Germany's was collapsing. The Canadian home front, transformed by the war, had become a vital arsenal. Its factories produced over 800,000 military vehicles, including the trucks and carriers used by Major's own regiment. Its farms fed Britain, and its shipyards built hundreds of naval and cargo vessels. This industrial might ensured that Le Régiment de la Chaudière was well-fed, well-equipped, and backed by overwhelming logistical superiority. This context is what made the planned artillery barrage on Zwolle possible in the first place. The Allies had a seemingly endless supply of shells. On the other side, the German economic situation was catastrophic. Relentless Allied bombing had leveled factories, shattered transportation networks, and crippled oil production. The garrison in Zwolle would have been suffering from shortages of everything: fuel, ammunition, quality food, and, most importantly, hope. They were an isolated pocket in a crumbling empire. Many were not elite, motivated Nazis but weary veterans, young conscripts, or older men of the Volkssturm. Their morale was brittle. This economic and industrial disparity created the conditions for Major's success. He was a single, well-armed soldier attacking a force that was numerically superior but materially and psychologically fragile. His rampage was the spark that ignited a powder keg of desperation and low morale. Had he attempted the same feat in 1941 against the triumphant, well-supplied Wehrmacht, the outcome would have been tragically different. His heroism was his own, but the stage for it was set by the vast, grinding machinery of the global war economy. A debt of gratitude, Zwolle's remembrance. The bond forged between Leo Major and the city of Zwolle on that terrifying April night never faded. It became a powerful, living symbol of liberation and individual heroism. After the war, Major returned to the city on multiple occasions, always to a hero's welcome. His visits were major civic events, with crowds lining the streets to greet the man who had single-handedly delivered them from occupation. For the people of Zwolle, he was more than a soldier, he was their liberator, a personal figure in a vast, impersonal war. His decision to act alone to prevent the destruction of their city by artillery was never forgotten. He had saved their homes, their historic city center, and countless lives. This act of compassionate defiance elevated him from soldier to savior in their eyes. This gratitude is formally enshrined in the city's culture of remembrance. The Leo Majorland is a prominent street, a daily reminder of his name. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the liberation, Major, then 84 and in failing health, returned one last time. He was mobbed by well-wishers, and his presence was the centerpiece of the city's ceremonies. After his death in 2008, the city of Zwolle's flags were flown at half-mast, an honor typically reserved for national figures or royalty. His story is taught in local schools, ensuring that new generations understand why their city was spared the destruction that befell so many others. This enduring legacy in the Netherlands is perhaps the most telling evidence of his impact. While his medals attest to his bravery, the genuine, multi-generational love of a city of 50,000 people is a testament to his humanity. The Final Salute, 2008. Leo Major passed away in Longueuil, Quebec, on October 12, 2008, at the age of 87. He was buried with full military honors in the last post-fund National Field of Honor in Pointe-Claire, Quebec. His funeral was attended by representatives from the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans associations, and dignitaries, including representatives from the city of Zwolle. His coffin was draped in the Canadian flag, and his impressive array of medals was carried on a cushion behind it. The story of his life, particularly the liberation of Zwolle and the battle for Hill 355, was recounted, reminding all present that they were laying to rest not just a soldier, but a figure of genuine legend. His death was reported in newspapers across Canada and, most notably, in the Netherlands, where he was mourned as a national hero. The obituaries struggled to capture the sheer improbability of his life. How could one man, partially blind, have accomplished so much? The final analysis of his life must conclude that he was a rare convergence of circumstance and character. He was a man born for conflict, whose profound disregard for his own safety and contempt for protocol became, in the chaos of war, his greatest weapons. He was the right man, in the right place, at the right time, twice. He survived wounds that should have killed him, fought battles that should have been unwinnable, and liberated a city that should have been destroyed. His passing marked the end of a unique chapter in military history, a final, quiet salute to the one-man army. Conclusion: the archivist's reflection. Closing the archival file on Leo Major leaves one with a sense of profound awe. His story is a powerful counter-narrative to the conventional understanding of the Second World War, which is so often told through the movements of armies and the decisions of generals. Major's saga is a stark reminder that history is also shaped by individuals, by singular moments of courage, rage, and audacious ingenuity that defy all expectation and statistical probability. He represents the immense potential that lies within a single, determined human being. His actions in Zwolle were not part of a grand strategic plan, they were a deeply personal, visceral reaction to the death of a friend. Yet, from that moment of grief, he produced a tactical masterpiece that saved a city. His story challenges us to reconsider the nature of heroism. Major was no plaster saint, he was a flawed, insubordinate, and difficult man. His heroism was not born of perfect discipline, but of a perfect storm of defiance and capability. He demonstrates that sometimes, the rules must be broken, and protocol must be defied, to achieve a greater good. The file on Private, then Sergeant, Leo Major, DCM and Bar, stands as a testament to the idea that even in the face of colossal, mechanized warfare that threatened to reduce men to mere numbers, the indomitable spirit of a single warrior could still blaze brightly enough to change the course of events, leaving behind a legacy of gratitude that will long outlive the echoes of his guns. The Lion of Zwolle may be gone, but his roar will forever echo in the streets of a liberated city and the pages of military history.